لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We begin by praising Allah, the Lord of the worlds, and by asking Allah to exalt the mention and grant peace to our messenger Muhammad and to his family and his companions. The question that we're being asked today is a new Muslim whose parents eat pork and other kind of meats which are prohibited in Islam. And the new Muslim has not yet told their parents that they have become Muslim. And they fear that if they stop eating this meat, that their parents would find out about their acceptance of Islam and that they would come to some harm because of that. This question, I want to really answer it by trying my best to give you certain principles and certain steps to take. Because everybody's situation is slightly different, the answer can also be slightly different depending on the person's circumstances and depending on what it is that they're going through. So what I would like to do is to try to start with some principles which would help you to understand this issue and help you to come to the right conclusion for yourself. So first of all, we need to know whenever we're asking a question like this, it's a question that I feel that I might be forced or compelled to do something which is haram or forbidden in Islam. So there are certain things that we need to do and certain steps we need to take. The very first step that we need to take is to understand the ruling of what we're asking about. So under normal circumstances, what's the ruling of this thing that I'm asking about? In this case, eating pork and other forbidden meats. What's the ruling on that? Generally speaking. So we have to understand that there are various types of food which are not allowed to eat in Islam. And the basic principle is that all foods are allowed. That's where we start from. All foods are permitted, except those foods which are specifically mentioned as being forbidden. So we don't start with a list of what we're allowed to eat. We're allowed to eat everything, except what is specifically mentioned. Now, if we're talking about meat, the Quran tells us certain meats that we're not allowed to eat. إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةَ وَالدَّمَ وَلَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا أُهِلَّ بِهِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. What is forbidden for you is al-mayta. Al-mayta, it means a dead animal. And when we say a dead animal, we mean an animal that has not been slaughtered for the purpose of eating. For example, a person finds a dead animal on the road. It's been involved in a car accident. Or a person knows that this animal was stunned to death. It wasn't slaughtered. Its throat wasn't cut. So this animal, or it died from a disease, this animal is not permissible to eat. Waddam is blood. And blood which remains in the meat is fine. For example, the animal, its throat is cut, the blood comes out. There is some blood left in the meat naturally. If you have a steak, there is some blood left in the meat. But that is absolutely fine. It's also fine to eat, for example, liver, but it's not allowed to eat blood. وَلَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ, and the meat of the pig. So whatever comes from the pig, whether it is all the different kinds of meats, whether it's ham or bacon or pork or anything similar to that, all of the meat that comes from the pig is completely forbidden. وَمَا أُهِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ, and that which was slaughtered to other than Allah. Now it's allowed to eat the meat slaughtered by a Muslim. It's also allowed to eat the meat slaughtered by a Jewish or Christian person. But it's not allowed to eat the meat slaughtered by an atheist or slaughtered by a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Sikh or any of the other religions. But it's allowed to eat the meat slaughtered by a Muslim or a Jewish person or a Christian person. Now that we understood that, we need to understand that eating pork is worse than, for example, eating the meat that you don't know where it came from. Now, this is important because when we rank a sin in order of how serious it is, that allows us to sometimes take perhaps a less serious route, which might get us out of the problem, rather than a worse one. And this is an important principle in Islam. Sometimes you will choose the lesser of two evils to avoid the greater one. So eating meat that you're not sure where it came from, and that meat is chicken or beef or lamb, for example, is far less in severity than eating pork, for example. And eating pork would be considered among the worst of the things that a person could eat. Now we know the ruling of it, we also need to understand our second point, which is a principle, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. You cannot obey someone from Allah's creation, from God's creation, if it means disobeying Allah, if it means disobeying God. And from the evidences for this is the statement of Allah in the Quran, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. And if your parents try to compel you and force you to make a partner with Allah in that which you have no knowledge of, and they force you to try to worship something else, or they force you to be a different religion, فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا, don't obey them. وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, and accompany them in this world in the best way. Be along with them, be kind to them, be soft with them, be gentle with them. Try to listen to them in as many things as you can, but you can't disobey Allah to please your parents or anyone else from among this creation. The third thing is to understand, and this is going to help us to understand the answer to the question. Insha'Allah, God willing, it's going to help us to understand the answer to the question. The third thing to understand is that harms are of different types. Some people, they are scared. If my parents see me, it is going to be a fuss. It is going to be hard. They are going to shout. They are going to threaten. They might take away something from me. They might ground me. They might shout at me. They might tell me I cannot be Muslim anymore. That is a certain harm. And that harm has its place within Islam and Islamic rulings. It is valid. But it's not the same as the person who fears that they will be killed. We have new Muslims who, for example, will say, if the news of me becoming Muslim reaches my parents, I genuinely feel that I could be killed. Or I could be harmed very severely to the point where I could be beaten, I could be attacked, I could suffer extreme harm. And we know people who have been in that situation. What I want you to do is don't mix the two, because the harm that reaches such severity that a person is scared for their life is different from a person who is worried about what might happen if their parents find out that they are Muslim. And honestly, you can't mix the two. You really can't. A person who really fears for their life is permitted to do things that the one who is worried about something or scared about what might happen is not allowed to do. So don't mix those two things and be honest with yourself with regard to the harm. I remember when I became Muslim, for me, I wouldn't say I would have ever feared for my life or feared for severe harm, but I would have feared embarrassment. I would have feared that things would be bad at home. I would have feared we would have got into an argument. I would have feared that perhaps perhaps if friends found out, they would have made fun of me, or they would have bullied me. They would have made my life hard. But that is not the same as the person who, for example, we had some new Muslims, for example, from India and places like that, for example, from staunch Hindu families, who honestly said, if my parents found out, I believe that they would try to kill me. We had some new Muslims from Africa like that as well. So that is not the same. And the situation of the person who is scared for their life, there is much more that they are allowed to do versus the one who is concerned and rightly worried about what might happen. So now we're going to come to the fourth thing that's going to help us. And trust me, if we go through these four things, inshallah, God willing, it is going to help you to understand the answer really, really well. And that is, if we can't avoid something forbidden, we always want to reduce the harm as much as possible. So for example, if my parents I'm worried about what they might say, for sure, me eating beef that I'm not sure where it came from, or me eating lamb that I'm not sure where it came from, or me eating chicken that I'm not sure where it came from, is far, far less severe than me eating pork. So for example, for me to say, for example, there's sort of pork belly on the table and there is a roast chicken. For me to take from the roast chicken, eating it, knowing that that roast chicken is potentially forbidden for me in Islam, it may not have been slaughtered by a Muslim or a Jewish person or a Christian person, that is way, way less than me eating that pork. So I always want to try to reduce the sin as much as possible and reduce the harm as much as possible. And finally, the last thing I'm going to say is that if you can give a false impression without lying, this is also permissible in cases of need in Islam. For example, a person says, I've decided to become vegetarian. I'm not going to eat meat anymore. I want to become vegetarian, or I'm on a diet, for example. Are you lying? No, not necessarily. I'm not eating meat anymore in the house. Or I'm on a diet, halal diet. You're not lying. You're just giving them a false impression. And that is permissible if there is a need. It's not permissible just to do it all the time in your life as though nothing matters, but it is permissible where there's a need. There's a famous story that when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he migrated from Mecca to Medina, the non-Muslims were chasing him and they were trying to kill him. They came across the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companion Abu Bakr. And they didn't know, the people who were chasing at that time, they didn't know who the Prophet was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. They didn't know who he was. So what happened was, they came across Abu Bakr and they said, who is this man with you? He said, he's my guide. Now Abu Bakr's intention is what? He's my guide who is guiding me in Islam. But what did they understand? He's my guide who's showing me how to go on the road. And he's my guide who shows me how to reach my destination. This is an example of giving a false impression. You gave someone the wrong idea, but you didn't lie. And this is something permissible. So again, I would say at the beginning, if a person can avoid the problem completely by just saying, I've decided to become vegetarian, or I am on a diet right now, I'm not going to eat any meat. I'm on a diet, I'm going to try to eat plant-based foods, whatever it might call it, whatever you want, all the different diets that are out there. I'm on a diet, I'm not going to eat any meat. Or a person says, I'm on a diet, I'm only eating chicken. I'm avoiding other meats, for example. This is far, far better for you than for you to do something which is haram. Because remember, we said we're trying to go in stages. If I can get away with not doing something forbidden, that's what I should do. So I'm not even doing anything wrong at all. I'm just saying, I decided not to eat meat anymore. I'm going vegetarian. Or I'm having a few months, I'm going to go vegan, or I'm going to go vegetarian, or I'm not going to eat red meat, or whatever a person wants to say. The second thing is, if that's not possible, go for the least possible sin, yani the smallest possible thing. That could be, for example, eating chicken when you don't know for sure that that chicken is allowed to eat. Or it could be, for example, eating from, and again, I would say this is worse, to eat from the same plate where the pork is, but not to eat the pork. That is worse than eating the chicken, because now you are probably contaminating, in some way or another. But again, if that means you don't put the pork in your mouth, but you eat something from the side of the plate, that is also less than eating the pork. As for eating the pork itself, then I believe that this really should only be done in an extreme case of fear, where a person truly believes that they would suffer to the point of something extremely severe. They fear for their life, or they fear that they would be tortured, or they fear that really that it would be extremely severe. And I feel that for a lot of people, it's an imaginary fear. I don't want to take away from the fear that new Muslims feel, because it's true. But for a lot of people, if you don't eat pork, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't cause that big of a problem. It's like, oh, look, I've changed my diet. I mean, people are on diets all the time. So what I wouldn't say is that the new Muslim should just go ahead and just eat that pork and don't worry about it and everything will be fine and, Allah will forgive you. And that's the wrong mentality to have. But the correct mentality to have is evaluate how serious the issue is. Try to get away with not doing something forbidden at all, like saying, I've changed my diet. Then, if you must eat from that which has a potential to be allowed, like chicken or beef or whatever it might be. And if that is impossible, then eat from the side of the plate and don't eat the pork. And if that is not possible, then really you have to ask yourself, is this situation severe enough for me that I really fear such a serious harm that I'm willing to do something which is seriously prohibited in Islam in order to save my life, or in order to save me from an extremely severe harm? And I think that is only a very small number of cases. And finally, I would say to the new Muslim that in this situation, what you have to do is you have to ask yourself, is it right for me to be staying in this place? Is it good for me to stay in this home when I am forced to eat what is forbidden, to drink what is forbidden? I am forced to perhaps have issues with my prayer, with issues with covering, for example, for a Muslim woman, and hijab. Why am I still in that place? Is it not possible for me to leave, to live somewhere else where I can practice my religion? You have to be honest with yourself and ask that question. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a teacher. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say that to you. Look at where you are and ask yourself, do I really need to be here? Is there really no other alternative? Because it's the wrong attitude for a person to go into that which is forbidden and to be involved in it day in, day out, and to say, well, that's just where I am, and may Allah forgive me. Instead, a person should take it very seriously and really look at their options and be honest with themselves so that they can quickly get out of the difficulty of this situation. That is what Allah made easy for me to mention, and Allah knows best. And we conclude by asking Allah to exalt the mention and grant peace to our messenger Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallahu khair for watching this video. If you've benefited from Ustad Muhammad Tim Humbo's videos here, we'd like you to head over to academy.islamicic.com. This is a complete new Muslim program that will take you from the start to finish of everything that you need to know as a new Muslim. Even if you're a born Muslim, you can still benefit from these videos. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and share with others so we can spread the benefit and spread the reward. From the One True Message Foundation Dawah team, Jazakumullahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.